I don't really have a strong background in agriculture, so I'm fortunate I went to school with a number of colleagues who are in different industries. And whenever I hear people complaining about the issues in agriculture, I'm always thinking to myself, they complain about their issues as well. In the education sector, health sector, even oil and gas, they complain about their constraints as well. So we beat up on agriculture, or beat up on ourselves, I think, a bit too much. I want to follow up on what Mr. Rollins was saying. In Trinidad, we have the industry development committees that have been formed to look at addressing issues impacting on the particular industry, addressing policy issues, trade issues, production issues, etc. And we incorporate all the stakeholders in the industry, whether it is even for borrowing the facilities of ICA or NAMDEFCO, or bringing together farmers, processors, researchers, etc. We bring everybody together to address the issues. It has worked pretty well, I think. But I think the problem in agriculture we have is that we expect things to move so quickly. We always want to see results quickly, and as soon as things will happen at our pace, we think it's not working. And I think that's the biggest problem. Development is something that's slow in the making, it's a slow process. It takes time, and I think we need to be a little more patient. And again, to follow up on Mr. Rollins' point, our same industry development committees, we have found that we haven't done as much as we could have because we lack the resources. We have big policy statements. Everybody wants to see food security, etc., etc. But there are no resources being pumped into actually making things happen. And again, from Diane's point, in terms of a change in administration, how it affects policy, in Trinidad we had a change in administration recently, and everybody made comments. TABA gonna get closed down. This policy gonna change. AFCT gonna do this. NFFA gonna get mashed up. And what we found, things have remained the same. I think if you have good policy, even the new government people will always appreciate what you have, and they will recognize how it can add value to their own program. So I think once we do proper planning, I think we will see things come to fruition. So those are my brief comments.
Agriculture, but there's a wider trend in the rest of the world, and it's being called land grabbing. And we may not be aware of it in the region, but it's happening in Africa and other parts of the world. And it's been driven by the need for food security, where the Dubai and the very rich places who don't have land come to the Caribbean countries where have some land, or the rest of the world, and they take the land for their own food security. And we, in the meantime, still talking about making policy, and the land keeps disappearing under our feet. So what are we going to do the agriculture on?
Several of the interventions have seen politics playing a major role in the policies being affected. Now, how do we, from a regional perspective, come as it relates to land grabbing? Yes, we might not be seeing it in the region, but yes, we are impacted by the irresponsible land usage, agricultural lands being developed. Now, how do we move from that and, come to a regional position on that?
I think in my opening remarks, I made the point that land tenure is key in terms of how we move with agriculture. Security of land tenure determines the decisions you make and the policies you set for yourself at the household level and moving on, really and truly. We've tried many ways, and land is a political issue in the small p sense, and I think all governments shy away from it in terms of really dealing with the whole question of regularizing land use. But we have to find a way to get some level of accommodation in terms of how we deal with that land issue, because it's true. But we also have to look at ourselves too as nationals of the particular countries in terms of how we value the land we already have. Our families need to begin to be a little more consensual and resolve conflicts in terms of inheritance. And it may be our own predisposition which is causing the land to disappear from us. So rather than the families come together and decide, we stay in England, in Argentina, in Peru, and everywhere, and we say sell the land, rather than seeing the value of the heritage for ourselves. So it has to do with us. At the end of the day, it's us who sell what we have, because we value more the dollars in the bank as opposed to the heritage that is priceless.
To me, it's not a question of policies. In fact, I would like to say exactly what Rufina said. We have all the policies already, Rufina, and I agree with you. It's a question of implementation and programs that support the policies. And when we look, for example, I'll give you one example. You will hear right now that ministries or governments are speaking to the land bank issue, and they're all saying that we should have a land bank. When you go to the ground to look to see where is this land bank, there is no land bank. There's no understanding of what a land bank is. I remember in one of the islands, in the Wayward Islands, that's the UWI, interacted with the government when they were actually trying to, well, I say, divide an estate to the north of the island, a very large estate. And we said, okay, let us use that land in perpetuity. Let's put it in a bank. Let's divide it into economic zones, not economic sizes, sorry. And the government agreed, and that was a policy. However, when it came to implementation, very close to the election, they said, well, listen, boy, this 20 acres for this economic crop, banana, is not good for the politics. So we divided it in 2 acres. So 2 acres mean there'll be 10 votes for every one. So it became a question of number of votes, and it had nothing to do with the policy. So the policy is still valid. It is still valid. It is the implementation of the policy. Now, what can we do as a group right here to expose these issues? And I think it's in exposing these issues that it's important to us, because we are going to come back and say the same policy.
On the land issue, just want to say that, follow up to what Rufina said, I think that it goes back to the point Bob was raising about agriculture within the entire economy in terms of our development. If agriculture is indeed important, if food security is something we attach great importance to, then you need to have a physical development plan where you identify areas of land for agriculture that you retain in agriculture. The so-called green belt approach, where there's certain land, you can buy it, you can sell it, you can do what you want to do with it. But the important thing is that you legislate that that land is for agriculture. It's good land, and it's land that you've dedicated to agricultural production. It's done in Barbados. There's certain zones in Barbados that can only be used for agriculture. And I think that it's a matter, it goes back to the issue of commitment and whether you're really serious about agriculture. And as a sector, if we are serious, governments will be willing to establish within their physical development plans areas that are dedicated, that you cannot move from agriculture. But we continue to say nice statements about agriculture, but you're not seeing it when it comes to, the policy statements are nice, but we need to give effect to the policy statements by having legislation and the necessary regulations that give effect to those statements.
I think what occurs with policy, and this back home in St. Lucia, I think the disconnect occurs between the policymakers and the persons who actually have to implement it. What I find occurring in St. Lucia is that you have a number of persons getting trained in agriculture, agronomists, botanists, but they don't come back and run any farms. They don't do any farming. So you find they create the policy and they ask persons who don't understand the policy to implement the policy. So that's where the disconnect occurs. If more trained persons actually become farmers, then if you look at how information flows up and down, in and out and across. The most information that is able to transfer is across the board. So if you have trained persons in agriculture understanding the policy, they would easier be able to transfer the information to persons who are not as well trained. But agriculture and the agriculture technology is advancing, the farmer is remaining the same, so the gap is obviously widening. When you look at tourism, persons get trained in tourism and they go into hotels, they run hotels, banking, all of those sectors. You have trained persons running the sectors, managing the sectors and creating a policy for the sector. But in agriculture, you get trained to set policy. And the farmer just stays a farmer because the farmer is just a farmer. So we need that the trained professionals get into farming. And you notice that if you look across the region where you have trained persons in a farm, that farm is a lot more successful than a farm that doesn't have anybody trained. So we need the trained professionals to actually get into the sector.
That's okay. What I think we have to do though is to recognize that there are many different groups of people who can be policymakers, and those groups have to get their political constituencies. Now, if the ministers have their own political constituency, that is fine, they're welcome to use it. But we, as a whole, different, diverse group of people who are doing different things along the value chain, we have to build political constituencies, or else nobody's going to listen to us, and nobody's going to be influenced by the things that we would like them to be influenced by. And I very strongly support Florita's point that it's not about the media becoming sexy, it's about pulling the media into us and getting media professionals anything in agriculture can be an exciting topic. I mean, we have a lot of problems with crime in agriculture. Crime is the bottom line of the newspaper today. Why can't we put some of that crime through the agriculture and make it heard? There are lots of ways we could do it. So I don't think there's any kind of ceiling on where the media can come into things. And I really think all of us have to get our political constituents.
Just to conclude by saying that I think it's some of both. I think there's some issues of implementation, but I also think there's still issues relating to the design of our policies. And I support Dr. Boudran's point about the fact that when it comes down to doing the hard analysis that helps us to be very clear all we want to do for specific industries, we have been lacking. And we've been making very general statements. So I think we need some of both. Giving effect in true proper implementation, and also addressing the issue of ensuring that our policies are very well focused by doing the hard analysis that needs to be done upfront to inform policy, to present options to the relevant policymakers.
My experience has taught me there's too much suspicion in the agricultural sector. There's no unity in terms of each of us adding value to what everybody else does. Farmers, for some reason, despise professionals. I don't know who caused that to happen. And I just heard, from the time we left school, people tell me, where's my farm? I said, I have no farm, because lawyers do not go and commit crimes to become the best lawyer out, and no doctor who took out anybody's appendix had appendicitis before.
Well, what I would briefly say is I think it's quite clear that we need solid data and information to backstop policy making. And that's basically what I refer to as research, and that has to be communicated in good time for good policy making. And it's clear that we need communication at different stages, agenda setting, policy making, and also making sure that the policies that are formulated are actually implemented. And I think for that we need to engage the media. We also need a very strong media network for the region that would be aware of what the issues are. They will be conversant with the concerns in the whole area of agriculture in the region, and they can support making sure that agriculture stays on the agenda. So I think the issue is to engage as many stakeholders as possible and to use the media as effectively as possible so that the policies that have been formulated are actually implemented.
My comment will be short. From this discussion, I understand that it is very important to involve the media in promoting agriculture, look at the issues, try to bring it to the general public. But most of all, what is important is that at national level, we know exactly where the different subsectors stands, gather the data, and together within the value chain and the private and public sector, working on policy that is not only based on the national level, but also with the influence of what we have in the global environment.
This is the close of the first panel. We'd like to thank our panelists, Mr. Rollins, Ms. Paul, Dr. Liu, and John King, for their perspectives, and also open up the discussion so that you could also provide your own comments and perspective as well. The policy dialogue is not ending here, because this is a topic that will never go away, but we need to ensure that when we talk about it after a while, we come to a certain kind of conclusion and then move forward in terms of action from there. So the CARI consultants, the media, the NFFAs, the CABAs, and even the ECAs who are involved in helping Ministry of Agriculture get on board in terms of spreading the dialogue beyond just this room, as Mrs. Kentish mentioned, beyond this room, in terms of your area or your sphere of influence, in ensuring that the agricultural issue remains on the agenda, it gets into the media, it gets into from the farm to the table in terms of what issues need to be discussed. And there are some issues that are going to carry over from this panel into the next panel about the land and those kinds of things. So we're hoping to have a seamless transition from this first panel into the second panel in terms of the scope of our policy, in terms of what we have left on the ground for agriculture.